Chapter 1. Iran. Above the ruins near Ray. The first sign came on the longest night of the year. The stars trembled. A stillness unlike death or sleep pressed the earth. And then, a tear of light appeared in the air itself, not sky, but space. Like someone had opened a window between worlds. Those who witnessed it described different things: a bull made of flame, a figure in radiant armor, a wheel of fire with eyes in every spoke. But all wept. Not from fear, but remembrance. A corporate tower in downtown Tehran imploded from within. No fire. No smoke. Just glass falling like stars and a low-frequency hum that silenced birds mid-flight. Security footage across the district showed static at the moment of detonation. Then, one single frame, caught like a stuttered breath in time, a figure composed of blinding light, shaped like a horned bull. Elsewhere, across continents and cultures, the world convulsed in its own quiet apocalypse. These earliest settlers called it Vatika, after an elder spirit, a goddess of thresholds and endings. To them, the hill was no mere height of land but a wound in the world, a place where the breath of the underworld rose to meet the stars. Rituals were performed not to honor the gods, but to contain them. Fires were lit at dusk and smothered before midnight. Stones arranged in crooked circles marked points where strange energies pulsed. Oral legends speak of the Watchers, priest-kings who tended the hill's secret, guarding rites that predated agriculture, writing, even the notion of kingship itself. When the Etruscans came, those mysterious builders whose origins are lost in the Aegean mist, they found the hill already sacred, already dangerous. They, masters of divination, recognized immediately what the hill was, a node where the heavens bent low enough to whisper. They named it anew, blending their tongue with the older one, Vaticanus Mons, the hill of prophecy. In Vatican City, the present, the holiest servers, those air-gapped and sealed beneath the apostolic palace, were flooded with an anonymous leak. Tens of thousands of documents, gospels that never made the canon, letters between long-dead popes, scribbled visions of saints struck from records. Each hinted at a name whispered across centuries of dogma. The Hidden One. Somewhere in Jerusalem, beneath the white stone of the old city, an imam rose during the night and spoke verses he'd never learned. Words in a rhythm as ancient as fire, his voice steady with a cadence beyond memory. He wept when it was done, not in sorrow, but awe. In New York, a rabbi dreamed of winged lions and altars of flame. He awoke shouting names of gods that predated his tradition. In a subway tunnel beneath London, a man emerged, naked, caked in red clay, muttering a language no living scholar could name. The covenant was broken, he rasped. Now it must be fulfilled. Symbols returned to the world. In frost on glass, on the skin of infants, inside the patterns of bees. Symbols not taught, not remembered, yet somehow known. A record, etched not in ink but in blood, bone, and genome. It would be easy to dismiss. Coincidence. Hoax. The devil's trick. But the Vatican did not dismiss it. Not officially. Within the granite walls of the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, miracles were weighed like currency. Most claims were stamped and shelved, or denied outright. But a few, the most disturbing ones, were sent elsewhere. Not filed. Followed. There were fanatics in the church. Scholars in cassocks who read beneath the lines of scripture, who studied Apocrypha with obsessive reverence. Who knew the enemy not by his horns, but by his return. The church had never forgotten the Hidden One. They had buried him. Stolen his feasts. Painted over his temples. Yet the bones of his rituals still beat like drums beneath the Mass, the Eucharist, the veil of allegory. The hidden shall be brought to light. In the silence of a Vatican side chamber, an unnamed cardinal, the sort who never appeared in papal photos, the kind who made popes, stared at an ancient mosaic of Sol Invictus. The sun unconquered. A face too similar to Christ to be coincidence. He closed his eyes. The cup of tribulation was full, and it was being offered again. In Tehran, authorities quickly sealed off the area. Radiation levels were tested, none detected. Seismologists labeled it a sinkhole, though satellite images told a different story. The structure had collapsed inward in a flawless spiral. The crater itself was unnervingly pristine, as if scrubbed by unseen hands. Beneath the debris, etched into the exposed stone walls, investigators discovered a symbol carved in relief, a bull struck by a dagger, flanked by two torchbearers. Weathered, but unmistakable. Ancient. Recognizable only to a select few. To an even smaller number, it was a sign not just of the past, but of something returning. Something they'd hoped would never resurface. The image raised no alarms publicly, but those who knew, they felt the tremor. As satellite images of the mysterious crater began circulating online, a middle-aged amateur astronomer in the Far East took notice. He had a habit of scouring newly released geospatial data for anomalies, mostly out of curiosity, sometimes boredom. At first glance, he assumed what he was seeing was a trick of the eye. Pareidolia, he reminded himself, the brain's tendency to perceive familiar patterns where none exist. But the shape stayed with him. One image showed a spiral formation along the crater's edge, oddly similar to the constellation of the Big Dipper. Stranger still, the pattern repeated itself for times, spaced evenly around the central point in a rotational symmetry reminiscent of ancient symbols, one of which history had twisted into infamy. In another photo, shadows and ridges formed what looked like an eight-spoked wheel. It brought to mind religious and philosophical symbols he'd only seen in textbooks, the wheel of Dharma, or the cyclic view of time found in many early cultures. He didn't jump to conclusions. Still, there was a feeling he couldn't shake, that these formations weren't accidents. They were too deliberate. He saved the files, made notes. Coincidence or not, something about this crater felt intentional. As the global stage trembles with unrest, a darker, subtler truth moves behind the curtains of power. In the shadows of oppressive regimes, hidden from the masses, the architects of chaos quietly orchestrate the events that drive the world to the brink of disaster. The world is not in turmoil because information is being suppressed. No, it is because there are now so many avenues to reach it. With each passing day, these channels become more convoluted, more complex, and harder to navigate. Social engineering, at its most sophisticated, operates with such finesse that only a few, those attuned to the hidden currents of power, ever notice. These are the conspiracy theorists, often dismissed as paranoid, but in reality, they are the ones who see the game for what it truly is. It is a long game, played in layers, where the average person sees only surface-level failures, while the players behind the scenes know that each failure is but another step in hiding their true goals. To most, it seems like an unconnected series of global missteps. Wars break out, economies falter, alliances shift, and yet the same few powers remain in control, manipulating the narrative in ways most never understand. To the conspiracy theorist, the question becomes, why start a war in Europe? Why repeat the same patterns, with new faces and new names, but the same underlying forces? The answer, they argue, is hidden in plain sight. The events of the past century, the rise of the Central Powers in World War I, the chaos of World War II, were all part of a larger, continuous strategy. The world at war, it seems, is merely a distraction, a way to create the illusion of power struggles over land, resources, or ideology, while the true players achieve their aims. Take, for instance, the Central Powers during World War I. The public narrative painted them as aggressors, seeking to dominate Slavic territories. In World War II, the same players emerged, but this time they manipulated the world into believing it was about global fascism. Now, as we stand on the brink of World War III, the same region, the same geopolitical stage, seems to be the flashpoint again. The conspiracist might ask, why this region? Why the repeated focus on Russia and its land? The answer, they propose, lies in the shell game of geopolitics. The world is being distracted by conflicts that are nothing more than a smokescreen for larger, more insidious movements taking place behind the scenes. While the world fixates on these manufactured narratives, deeper, more subtle machinations unfold in regions like the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, once a conservative nation, has allowed women to drive small, incremental changes that signal a shift in power dynamics, but also a distraction from more significant maneuvers occurring beneath the surface. In the meantime, Israel's political enemies grow louder, their protests as desperate as the death rattle of an animal fighting its last fight. They echo the strategies of Sun Tzu, playing the long game, adapting to the situation rather than cornering their foes. Israel understands the importance of patience, the power of waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The world, however, often misinterprets this as complacency or even weakness. Meanwhile, in Iran, the struggle is far more public, a direct conflict with Saudi Arabia, but one fought largely through proxy wars. Yet, how long can this continue? The West has always found ways to exploit divisions and weaknesses, and even the mighty Soviet Union eventually collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. Iran, too, it seems, is on borrowed time. The current regime may believe it is invincible, but the subtle forces at play in the background are eroding its power. The long game, as always, is in motion. The world has seen this before, and it knows how these stories end. The longer one looks at these global events, the more the picture becomes clear: a shell game, a carefully crafted illusion of conflict designed to distract and manipulate. Beneath the noise, behind the political theater, the true power players move in silence, calculating every move, every twist of fate. They play the long game, knowing that the world's attention will always be focused on the immediate, on the loudest crises, while the real transformation happens in the shadows. And in the end, when the smoke clears, the few will stand victorious, having orchestrated it all from the very beginning. The modern gods, the gods that we know of today to much of the Western world, but except that of the Vedic world. They are floundering with their greed, the monarch behind it all still controlling it, trying to extend her term and the next to a millennia more. The old gods are coming back. Chapter 2. Setting, Tehran, a dim cafe on a side street near the university. Point of view, Ava Nazari. A dim cafe on a side street near the university. The candle on the table had gone out 10 minutes ago, but Ava Nazari still stared at the lazy tendrils of smoke curling into the stale cafe air, as if they were trying to shape themselves into forgotten letters. She traced them with her eyes, trying to decode their meaningless swirls. A trick of the light, she told herself. Or exhaustion. Outside, traffic whispered past on the narrow street, the occasional bark of a vendor calling out over honking scooters. The cafe was mostly empty, just a pair of students debating over a dog-eared textbook, and the barista scrolling idly behind the counter. The overhead light flickers every so often, casting the room in momentary shadow. It was exactly the kind of place you went to be invisible. Which made the man's entrance all the more conspicuous. "You're early," came a voice behind her, dry as parchment. She turned. The man was tall, wrapped in a heavy wool coat that seemed out of place in the mild Tehran evening. He wore a scarf despite the lack of chill, and his eyes, grey, flinty, seemed to take in everything and reveal nothing. He sat across from her without asking, folding his gloved hands on the table. "Dr. Ava Nazari," he said. "You've been digging in old places. Dangerous places." She tensed, keeping her tone even. "Who are you?" The man reached into his coat and placed a small velvet pouch on the table. With a single push of his fingers, he slid it toward her. Ava didn't move at first. She studied the pouch. Then him. Finally, curiosity overcame caution. She opened it. Inside was a coin. Circular, bronze, worn but intact. On one side, a bull, muscle straining, neck arched, pierced by a dagger. Stars glittered above it. A serpent coiled beneath, drinking from the wound. Her breath caught in her throat. "This," she whispered, turning it over in trembling fingers, "this coin hasn't been seen since the 3rd century. "Incorrect," the man replied calmly. "It hasn't wanted to be seen. Until now." The lights in the cafe flickered again. Longer, this time. Ava looked up. The barista had vanished. The air felt thicker, like the moment before a summer storm. She gripped the coin tightly. "Do you know what this means?" The man was already rising, his chair scraping lightly against the floor. "It means you need to run, Dr. Nazari. They know what you are." He walked out without another word. Ava sat frozen, her pulse thudding in her throat. What was she? She was born in Santa Clara, California. Daughter of Iranian immigrants, both high-achieving professionals who had long since traded the uncertainties of the old world for the promises of the American dream. Her father, a mechanical engineer. Her mother, a geneticist. They were pragmatic, future-facing people, content to let religion remain a cultural ornament, a formality observed only for family dinners or weddings. They spoke of Iran in warm nostalgia but avoided politics, and certainly never spoke of gods. But Ava's real education began with her grandfather. Dariush Nazari had arrived on their doorstep when she was 8, a quiet old man who smelled faintly of rosewater and dry earth. He brought with him a battered suitcase, a limp left leg from a prison injury he never explained, and a cedar chest sealed with iron clasps. Her parents had accepted his presence out of obligation. Ava, however, adored him. He rarely spoke at dinner. But every night, when the house quieted, he would tiptoe into her room and sit on the edge of her bed. He would tell her stories, not from the Koran nor the Shahnameth, but older, stranger tales. He spoke of a golden bull whose blood birthed the stars. Of twin flame-bearers who guarded the liminal spaces between life and death. Of a god who was neither man nor beast, but something older, bound to covenants of fire and sacrifice, who once walked the dawn skies of an unremembered world. He never named the god. But Ava remembered. After his death, sudden, unexplained, a heart attack, her mother said, his stories haunted her. Not in fear, but in fascination. They seemed to linger behind her eyelids, echo in the spaces between facts. Even as she advanced through school, excelling in anthropology and ancient history, the imagery he had painted with his soft, raspy voice continued to surface in the margins of her notes, the architecture of her dreams. By the time she was 17, Ava had abandoned any thoughts of following her parents into science. She was drawn to the past, specifically, the forgotten corners of it. In college, she found herself immersed in pre-Abrahamic Middle Eastern faiths. She became fixated on recurring motifs that showed up across cultures and centuries: the sacrificial bull, the eternal flame, the wheel with 8 spokes, the watchful stars. While others dismissed these as archetypes or mere coincidence, Ava was convinced there was a buried thread connecting them all. Her doctoral work took her from dusty archives in Paris to desolate temples in Jordan. She published quiet but significant papers. Earned respect. And yet, her obsession with proto-Mithraic cults and their pre-Zoroastrian roots kept her just outside the academic mainstream. Then the blackouts began. At first, they were easy to dismiss, missed minutes here and there. A sleepwalking incident chalked up to stress. But soon, hours would pass with no memory. She'd wake in unfamiliar places, once on the roof of her apartment building, barefoot, staring up at the stars. Another time, she came to, in a library bathroom, her arms covered in ink symbols she didn't remember drawing. And then there were the dreams. Every time she closed her eyes, the golden bull, eyes glowing like suns, standing in a field of burning reeds. Blood pooling into stone channels. Stars raining down like fireflies. And behind it all, a voice, not speaking, but humming inside her skull. Not words. Just presence. She began sleep-talking in a language no one could identify. Friends became concerned. One of them, a linguistics PhD, recorded a clip and ran it through software. The closest match, Ancient Avestan, a liturgical language of Zoroastrianism thought to be extinct except for formal recitations. She didn't want to believe it. She told herself it was psychological. A kind of academic possession. Maybe she was going too deep into her subject matter. Maybe the mind, when focused too long on dead things, started to hallucinate life in them. Until the envelope arrived. Postmarked from Tabriz. No return address. Inside, GPS coordinates to a site in the Zagros Mountains and a single line in Farsi. The fire has not gone out. Ava had stared at it for hours. Her hands had shaken as she held it. Something old and invisible had shifted in her chest, like a door opening she hadn't known was there. She arranged a research trip under the guise of studying burial sites. It wasn't hard. She still had connections. Her Persian was fluent. And the location, an abandoned military base from the 1970s, was off limits but not impossible to reach. Locals wouldn't talk about it. Those who did would grow quiet or superstitious. One old man told her, "The ground there drinks memory. Whatever you take in, it does not return." The site was worse than expected. What had once been a military installation had collapsed inward, not from bombs or weathering, but in a precise spiral, like something beneath had been pulling the earth into itself. Ava launched a discreet survey. Beneath the concrete and twisted rebar were layers of older stonework, columns carved with reliefs of bulls, serpents, and celestial symbols. At the very bottom, hidden behind a false panel, she found something impossible, a scroll tube sealed with wax. The text inside was fragmentary. Middle Persian, likely derived from Avestan. She could only translate parts. But one word recurred, Magavan. She knew it. She'd seen it referenced only once before, or a footnote in a dusty German dissertation. A priesthood. Long thought extinct. Keepers of the flame. Guardians of Mithra's covenant. She had read the term before, or barely a footnote in Zoroastrian studies. No, this was older, she whispers. It referred to a priestly caste that had vanished centuries ago, even a millennia, rumored to be flamekeepers not of the state religion, but of an older, purer rite. A hidden lineage. Some believed they had been wiped out during the Arab conquests. Others whispered that they had simply disappeared. In the back of the scroll was a name. Her own. Ava froze. She read it again and again, trying to deny it. The script was ancient, yes, but the combination of characters, unmistakable. Her name, or a variant of it, or cognate even, preserved in a scroll no one had read in over 1,000 years. It could not be coincidence. How? Ava began to suspect the truth. Not all at once, but in layers, like an excavation site slowly giving up its bones. Since then, the dreams have intensified. The blackouts grew longer. And always, when she returned to consciousness, she felt stronger. Sharper. Like something was sharpening her soul from the inside out. Her dreams worsened. She would wake up speaking in tongues she didn't recognize but could somehow translate. She began drawing symbols in her sleep. One morning, she found her pillowcase scorched, burned in the shape of a sun with 8 rays. And now this man. This cafe. This coin. Ava sat alone again, the weight of the object in her hand making her whole body feel suddenly heavier. Her ears rang. "They know what you are," he had said. She didn't know what she was. Not exactly. But she was beginning to suspect. Her grandfather had not told stories. He had planted seeds. Her parents were not secular by chance, they were hiding. Her family had been protecting something. A bloodline. A memory. A flame. The fire had not gone out. It was in her. She was not a chosen one. Not in the way myths described. But she was a key. A vessel. A doorway through which something ancient, something divine, might find purchase in the world again. She wasn't sure what that meant yet. She wasn't sure what the dreams signified, or why the world seemed to be stirring with ancient echoes, from strange sky events to symbols resurfacing in unexpected places. But she could feel something moving beneath the surface of the world, like tectonic plates grinding into alignment. Truth, she was realizing, was not something safe and academic. It did not live in textbooks or museum catalogues. It bled. It whispered. It burned. Ava Nazari, the rational scholar, was beginning to vanish. In her place, something older was waking. Not a prophet. Not a saint. But a torchbearer. Lucifer, Venus, she mumbled silently. A keeper of fire. And whether she wanted it or not, the god beneath the sky was calling her home. The truth wasn't metaphorical. It was waking up. And it was stranger, far stranger, than fiction. Chapter 3. Setting, Rome, sub-basement of an abandoned basilica. Point of view, High Priest Leontes. Rome, sub-basement of an abandoned basilica. No one remembered when Leontes was born. Not precisely. Not truly. Even those closest to him, those who had walked the hidden roads beneath mountains and deserts to kneel at his feet, only whispered fragments. Some claimed he had emerged fully grown from the sacred fire beneath Mount Damavand, where the last of the Magi once fled during the fall of the Achaemenid Empire. Others murmured that he was centuries old, kept alive through rites too ancient to be written, sustained by the breath of fire and the weight of blood. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. He had become what the world no longer had words for. To his followers, he was not merely a man, nor even a prophet. He was the flame-bearer, the living axis, the unbroken conduit through which Mithra's forgotten light passed. His name, Leontes Vardanes Achaemenid, was itself a kind of incantation, carefully chosen to veil more than it revealed. Those who had studied the old tongues could discern the lineage buried in its syllables. Vardanes, of the Parthian kings. Achaemenid, of the oldest bloodlines. But even that name was a mask. He had worn others. Hundreds, perhaps. He had walked through history not as a participant, but as a keeper. The last Magavan Marsban, the custodian of the veil, son of the fire, and scion of kings long turned to ash. Beneath the domed sanctums of Nemrut Dar, where dead emperors still whispered through wind and stone, he had stood alone, listening to the breath of the world, waiting for the flame to return. Now he waited no longer. The chamber beneath the basilica was older than the city above. Rome itself had built atop bones, and this was one of the deepest, hewn in a time when Mithra was worshipped by legionaries and emperors alike, before the church twisted the heavens to fit a foreign cross. Leontes stood barefoot on the cold stone, the hem of his robe soaked red with blood. The sacrificial altar before him pulsed with a dull heat, a remnant of the rites recently performed. The Mithraean was alive again. He wore his high vestments, robes of black and crimson, stitched in patterns only the initiated could read. On his chest, visible beneath the translucent folds, the tattoo of a lion devouring a serpent glistened with oil and sweat, a mark inked in ceremony decades ago. Only the high priest bore such a seal. It was a symbol of dominion, yes, but also of burden. The divine and the terrible always came hand in hand. Behind him, 7 masked figures stood in silent formation. The masks were sacred, carved from bone, obsidian, or hammered bronze, each depicting a symbol of Mithraic power: the raven, the bull, the lion, the cupbearer, the twin fires, the scorpion, and the dagger. They spoke only when the flame allowed it. Leontes raised the obsidian bowl in both hands and began to pour the blood offering into the altar's channel. It slid down like wine, dark and steaming, tracing the age-worn grooves toward the gaping mouth of the stone bull that loomed at the back of the chamber. "It is begun," he said, voice calm, reverent, yet carrying the weight of finality. The raven stepped forward first, mask elongated like the beak of an augur. The signs align. The watcher in the clay has awakened. The bloodline has been located. Leontes inclined his head, unsmiling. She must not fall into the hands of the schism. Are they active? The Americans intercepted the Tel Megiddo fragment. The Israelis have triggered the Vatican Protocol. The Sicarii move in the shadows again. A low laugh came from the lion mask. They think it's about relics. Lost tablets. Cracked scrolls. They believe this is about prophecy, said the scorpion, his voice dry and rasping. They forget what prophecy really is. They forget it is a map, not a story. They forget everything, Leontes murmured. His fingers brushed the bull's stone brow. But the stars remember. The others fell silent. He turned back to them, eyes flashing with gold. Mithra does not rise with gentle hands. He returns through upheaval. Fire, blood, awakening. The long night is the forge. We do not protect her because she is sacred. We protect her because she is necessary. The girl, said the cupbearer, Ava. Are you sure she is the one? She is of the line, Leontes said. The flame runs through her, imperfect, impure, but present. I saw her in dreams before her body was even formed. Her name was spoken in fire, sealed in salt, buried beneath the bones of kings. He stepped away from the altar, the air shimmering around him. She may be the herald of the flame's return. Or she may be its greatest threat. That is yet to be seen. A pause. Then the dagger asked, and if she burns too bright? If the flame inside her is not his, but something else? Then, said Leontes, I will extinguish her myself. The others did not question it. To those who met him on the surface, in Rome's underground academies, in quiet bookstores, in polite symposiums and tea rooms, Leontes was gentle, poetic, almost soft. He quoted the Avesta and Homer with equal ease. He sipped saffron tea with patience. He listened more than he spoke. But that man was only a sliver of him, a reflection through water. The truth of Leontes lived down here, in flame, in blood, in silence. He had walked barefoot across burning coals to bring prophecy to life. He had sealed breaches in the veil between worlds by burning out the names of angels with sacred iron. Once, in a ruined temple at the edge of the Zagros Mountains, he had drowned his own brother under starlight while whispering prayers to Mithra, because the stars had demanded a sacrifice. The world above had forgotten. Forgotten the flame, the order, the watchers beneath. They had written over the old names, Mithra, Anahita, Ahura Mazda, and raised new ones, Jesus, Jehovah, Allah. They had split the light into fragments and made war over each one. But Mithra was not a god of war. He was the covenant. He was the flame that knew. And Leontes was his last keeper. The church had tried to erase them. The Vatican's secret orders, the Petros and the Sicarii, had hunted the children of flame for centuries. They'd burned texts, silenced prophets, infiltrated the bloodlines. But some roots grew too deep. Leontes had survived them all. And now, they feared him again. He moved toward the rear of the chamber, to the niche where the oldest tablets were kept. They were not made of stone, but of something far older, etched by flame into a metal that had no modern name. Only a few could read them. Leontes could read them all. He reached out, brushing his fingertips across the closest tablet. Glyphs shimmered faintly at his touch. She dreams of light breaking through stone, he murmured. The others stirred. They knew what that meant. She is remembering, said the raven. She must be brought in, said the cupbearer. Not yet, Leontes said. She must choose. She must walk through the fire herself. Only then will we know if the flame has truly returned. And if the others find her first, asked the dagger. Leontes turned slowly. The flickering firelight cast his shadow across the walls like a beast with many limbs. Then the world burns in ignorance. He moved back toward the altar. The girl is a key, yes. But the door she opens is greater than anyone's soul. The covenant must be restored. The flame rekindled. The veil torn. And what of the Imam? Asked the lion. He plays his role. His bloodline, too, carries the spark. But he is the memory. She is the future. And Ramon? A seeker. Not yet aware of what he is. But drawn by fate. Leontes lowered himself to one knee before the altar and pressed his forehead to the stone. The warmth radiating from it was not earthly. Not truly. It was the residual breath of something deeper, older, waiting. He whispered. We do not worship fire because it burns. We worship fire because it transforms. The words echoed, not just in the chamber, but in the bones of the world. Somewhere, far from Rome, Ava stirred in her sleep. Light seeped through her dream like water breaking through a dam. The twin fires stepped forward now, speaking in unison, as they always did. And the time of convergence. 3 days before the solstice, Leontes replied. The longest night. When the veil is thinnest. When the world turns toward shadow. And the temple shall rise, he said. Beneath stars that remember. Beneath names long lost. They bowed. Then all 8, including Leontes, spoke together, the ancient litany that had not been heard aloud since the second temple fell. By fire we see. By fire we are bound. By fire we return. Silence fell. Not mere quiet, but the profound hush of something vast and watching. The flame in the center of the altar surged once, as if breathing. Leontes rose. The world above would not understand what was coming. They would see chaos. Storms. War. Madness. But it would not be destruction. It would be rebirth. And Mithra would rise again.